It's time for the Daily Stand Up Podcast presented by Agile Dad with your host, Lee Henson. Without any further ado, let's get started. I recently had an article sent in from one of our listeners. Appreciate those. Those are always nice when I get those because then I get something to read and chime in on. This was an article that was published by Sander Dur. He is a professional Scrum trainer for Scrum.org. And he wrote an article called The 7 Things to Do During Sprint Planning. Now, I found this really interesting because right out of the gate, he identified himself as a PST, which I think is awesome. They have a lot of really good PSTs out there as well. And I saw that this article was really focused on why the sprint is valuable. Why is this sprint valuable? What can be done during a sprint? And how will the forecasted work be completed, which are the crux of sprint planning. And I've said for a long time that I believe that when you're doing sprint planning this way, that you can really get your head around, are you asking the right questions? I always say that. So the fact that he comes out of the gate asking questions is impressive to me because I feel like it's a good deal, right? And then he goes on to talk about sprint lengths and time boxing, typical topics. But then he gets into these 7 tips. Now, these 7 tips I thought were really, really interesting. So I'm going to share the 7 tips with you and chime in and give you feedback on each one. So coming at number 1 right out of the gate, use feedback coming out of the sprint review. Here. I think too often what I see is that teams will engage and do a really good sprint review with the product owner, and the product owner will meet with the stakeholders after. But then for whatever reason, they keep plowing forward new features instead of using the feedback out of the sprint review to help them pivot or adjust. I think people are just afraid if I pivot or if I adjust, that I'm not going to get the quote unquote promised list of features out. So I think that if you take feedback from stakeholders and then you don't act on it, that's worse than just, not. That's worse than taking, just plowing through the list of things you need to do. It goes without saying that it's important for us to listen to the stakeholders. But if you listen and then do nothing about it, that really is bad form. So I think it's good for us to keep something like a red light, green light report. I talk about that quite a bit, where you can imagine an Excel sheet where you have all the work that's slotted for this sprint and upcoming sprints. And you can say these are definitely going to happen by the expected deadline or release date. These are at risk, and then these others are just not even in scope. So that way, if new work is introduced, you can at least, or just feedback, you can pivot, you can adjust, and you can place new things into the at-risk category and just see where you are, right? And get a real-world picture of where you should be. Number 2, reassess any remaining work from the last sprint. Now, this one caught me off guard because I don't necessarily agree that work should carry over from one sprint to another. And I love his quote here. He says, do not just blindly spill it over because it's almost finished or it needs to be done anyway. Or he calls it the corporate disease. Well, there's always next sprint. Oh my goodness, no. If you have work that carries over, you need to understand why. And generally, I can give you a big hint. Typically, it's a symptom of time-based estimation or the team trying to be too aggressive in pulling work into the sprint, both of which can be easily corrected. But I think that we should, take a look back, and if there was remaining work last sprint, analyze why, right? Don't just carry it over. Number 3, use the time box to refine product backlog items. I agree. So instead of doing it during this sprint planning meeting, however, I believe that this should be an independent 1-hour meeting where each team dedicates 1 hour to the product owner to get this done. The reason why I pull it out and separate it is because I want each team to have their own private opportunity to do this, and I don't want it to cut into their time that they have for sprint planning. I don't want to extend meetings. We all have this thing called attention span, and I think that sometimes we make our meetings too long, and the team feels like they're spending all their time in meetings, where if you have just a couple of short meetings, it doesn't feel like it has this heavy impact on a team and allows them to remain focused. So I definitely feel like we should do backlog refinement, no question, and that the team should be heavily involved. But I believe that it should happen outside of the sprint planning meeting. So food for thought. Number 4 is invite subject matter experts. I want to clap out loud for this one because this one is probably one of the most important things that we never do. I feel like it's incredibly important to have subject matter experts around at least during the initial part of our sprint planning meeting, so that we can get their feedback, so that they can provide additional information or insight. I think too often we go in under the assumption, yes, 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 I know what it is, when in actuality, no, 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 we don't. So I think it's important for us to listen to the subject matter experts. And once again, not just listen to them, but offer solutions based on their feedback. I think too often we can hear them speaking, but we don't hear what they're saying, which makes for a really interesting conundrum. Coming at number 5, relate the objective to product goals. Now, this is an interesting one because I think sometimes we don't take the time to analyze and assess and figure out what we should be doing and how it ties back to product goals. I think that if we did this, that our sprints would be more focused. He mentions a book called The Professional Product Owner by Ralph Yoakum and Don McGreal. And they discuss a concept called the product management vacuum, the disconnection between sprint goals and product goal visions. I agree with that 100%. I think that if you're going to have a sprint goal, that needs to be meaningful and it has to be directly tied back to the product goal or vision. And if it's not, then you question, why are we being asked to do these things? Coming in at number 6, plan improvement items coming out of the sprint retrospective. That one I will clap out loud. Yes, yes, yes. That is exactly what we should be doing. So I see too often where teams spend quality time determining what they want to work on to help each other next sprint, or how they want to improve the process, or what's one thing they could do better, or whatever the case may be. And then they take that goal and they write it down somewhere and tuck it away and say, that was our goal. And then they never look at it, address it, identify it, or talk about it again. It's important at the beginning of each sprint planning meeting to review our goal from the previous sprint planning meeting, or review our goal for the upcoming sprint as well, to make sure that we are in line with what we're trying to do and that we have those improvement items listed. Now, I often get asked, should those improvement items carry tags, meaning should they carry a story point value? And my answer is yes. If it's just something that you're trying to be mindful of, hey, we need to communicate better, you can make that a 0 point backlog item. But if it's something where it has a tangible output and it's going to actually take time to do, then sure, it should have story points and it should be estimated just like any other story. Finally, number 7, identify dependencies. And this is my favorite part of his whole thing. He says, if you haven't already, this is something I've been a stickler for a long time, talking about how dependencies shouldn't creep up on you, right? If you have dependencies, you should probably know that you have dependencies. If you have dependencies, you should probably be addressing those. And I think that too often we don't address the dependencies timely enough and they just kind of spring up on us, quote unquote. And the truth is that dependency's been there all along. And many times people know it's there and they know it's coming, but they just don't want to do anything about it because, well, either it's hard or they just don't know how to address it or who's going to address it. So this comes from an old Mark Twain quote, eat the live frog first, where it talks about taking the most difficult thing and getting it over with. So what I can tell you is, if you haven't thought about this, this is a good time for you to think about it, but you should have already thought about it, right? Because dependencies are something that should be addressed right away. And he goes on to give you a couple of bonus tips, and I like his bonus tips, so I'm going to make sure I read these off. His first bonus tip to make sprint planning really, really nice is to use definition of done, velocity, and capacity if necessary as guidelines. Definition of done to make sure everything is mapped to a common understanding and ensures that the developers and the people who are creating the backlog are on the same page. Velocity to make sure we're selecting the right number of backlog items to go into a sprint, that we're not overpowering or overloading a sprint. Capacity to make sure there's no one that's going on vacation or taking planned time off. So that way we can make sure, once again, that we're calling in the right number of backlog items. I don't really strictly adhere to capacity. I don't break things down all the way to the task level and have the team figure out hours. But I do want them to, feel comfortable with the amount of work coming in if someone's going on vacation. Another one he says is create breakouts. Sometimes discussions held between just 2 or 3 people without involving the rest of the team, and the rest of the team just zones out. They're not taking part, they're unengaged. He says in that case, you should have breakouts where people can remotely, especially if they're working at home, they can swarm in little groups or physically work together if they're in person, and they can figure out things together and solve complex problems and plan together. I think that's a brilliant idea. Another one that's my favorite is take regular breaks. Now, even pre-pandemic, this is something that I used to do. I used to say every hour you should get up and stretch, right? And people hated it, but they loved it. Because if you just stand up, stretch your legs, walk around a little bit, it's going to get your blood flowing. It's going to help you stay energetic. It's going to make sense. And a lot of people ask me when they see me teach courses, they're like, man, as the day goes on, you get even more energetic. And that's true. And I think part of it is just that I get up and I walk around quite a bit. So I don't let myself slip into that energy slump. Well, there you have it. That was a great article. So bravo, Sander. You did a great job with this article. I agree with every single thing that's in here. And it just goes to show you that just because I'm a certified Scrum trainer and he's a professional Scrum trainer, that it's not likely that we'll agree on things, because that's not true. We agree 100%, and I feel like this is a strong article from a great trainer. So, if you'd like to learn more about sprint planning or any other topic, feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you at learnmore@agiledad.com. Until next time, we encourage you to stay healthy, stay well, and stay agile, my friends. Do take care.